Welcome to the Architecture Woodshop and Digital Fabrication Lab on the Marietta campus of Kennesaw State University. This video is about bandsaws. This video will cover the proper techniques to use to safely make various cuts using a bandsaw. It will also cover the differences between the bandsaws that are in the shop and how to select the best bandsaw for the type of cut that you need to make. At the end of this video, you will know how to safely use a bandsaw and how to select the best bandsaw to use. A bandsaw can be used to make different types of cuts in material. A bandsaw can be used to make cuts that are straight. A bandsaw can be used to make cuts that curve. A bandsaw can be used to make cuts through relatively thick material. Using proper technique, bandsaws can be used to safely cut material that is relatively small compared to other types of saws. A bandsaw can be used to make cuts that make thick material thinner. This type of cut is called resawing, and this technique is covered in more detail in another video specifically about the resawing technique. The bandsaws that are in the wood shop are able to cut wood and wood-like products, which include MDF, particle board, OSB, glue laminations, and plywood. Bandsaws can also be used to cut foam and plastic materials. Never use the bandsaws in the shop to cut any metal of any kind, ever. Aluminum is metal. If you have questions about the material you want to cut, please ask a staff person before making any cuts. Please keep in mind that the shop rules are here for your safety and the safety of the equipment. Failure to follow the rules could result in injury or loss of shop privileges. The general shop rules are the following. No food or drink is allowed in the shop. No tobacco use is allowed. After all, the campus is tobacco-free. Proper shop attire is that closed-toed shoes are required, or you'll be invited to wear the shoes of shame and add your autographed photo to our gallery. Also, no loose hair or clothing is allowed. Roll up your sleeves, remove jewelry, tie back or tuck in ties and scarves. Safety glasses are required at all times while in the shop. No music is allowed in the shop outside the laser room. You need to be able to maintain focus and be accessible to direction from the staff. And you need to obey direction from the shop staff when it's given. Shop rules related to equipment use are the following. Choose the right machine for the task. If you have a question about what is best for what you plan to do, ask a member of the shop staff. We're here to help with that. Only use the equipment for intended purposes. The purpose of different pieces of equipment is covered in the shop tour video. Always follow the approved procedures for operating a particular piece of equipment. You are required to clean up your mess after using a machine, leaving it clean for the next user. Never clean or adjust a machine while it's operating. Stop and secure the machine before cleaning or adjusting. Equipment setup and adjustments are to be made by shop staff only. Ask if you think you need a machine adjusted or the setup change. Promptly report the potential sign of a machine problem or failure to the shop manager or shop supervisor. Such indicators include an unusual noise, an unusual pitch, or other unusual operating characteristics. Never tamper with, remove, or negate machine safety guards or interlocks. Keep in mind that woodworking is a dangerous activity and can create a hazardous environment. You should maintain focus and be aware of your surroundings at all times. Safety glasses are required in the shop at all times. Hearing protection may be required for particular equipment as determined by the KSU Environmental Health and Safety Group. Headphones or earbuds are not hearing protection, and music is not allowed outside the laser room. Breathing protection may also be required by KSU Environmental Health and Safety in accordance with the University Respiratory Protection Program. Now we're ready to take a closer look at bandsaws. Bandsaws get their name from the fact that they use a blade that is one continuous band. The blade goes around two wheels that drive the blade. The size of the wheels is what determines the size and throat capacity of the saw. The blade moves so that when the blade passes through the cutting area, it is moving downward through the table. Never turn on a bandsaw with the doors open. When using a blade to do any cutting, it is important that the blade does not change position. A bandsaw uses sets of blade guides that are above and below the table that keep the blade in position. It is important to properly set up the bandsaw to make your cut. For users, setting up the bandsaw means adjusting the position of the upper blade guide. With the upper blade guide in a high position, there's enough distance between the upper and lower guides that the blade can deflect or not cut straight, even if the blade tension is very high. The upper blade guide is adjustable so that the distance between the guides can be as close as possible, and therefore the control of the blade is maximized. It is important before cutting to adjust the upper guide to around ½ inch above the material to be cut. Upper blade guide height adjustment is probably the only adjustment that you'll need to make to the bandsaw. If you feel that other adjustments need to be made to the saw, please ask a staff member to check on the situation and make any necessary adjustments for you. Remember that we want to collect dust at the source whenever possible. Our dust collection system is on several, but not all machines. Turn the system on before and off after machine use. Open blast gates before and close after machine use. Some cuts on the bandsaw need a special setup. Such special setups include the following: using a miter gauge for cross-cutting, using a rip fence for ripping, using a point fence for ripping, using a tall fence for resawing. Let's take a closer look at each of these setups. If you're cross-cutting material, particularly if it is small, you may want to use a miter gauge to help guide your material through the cut. Be careful when using a miter gauge that you don't get the gauge into the blade. Using a fence may help you make some types of cuts on a bandsaw. It is important to understand that while a fence will help to keep the blade a constant distance from the edge of the material, a fence will not guarantee a straight cut. Bandsaws almost never cut parallel to the edge of the table, or what a user would call straight. A bandsaw not cutting straight is called blade drift. Factors that contribute to blade drift include how the teeth were formed on the bandsaw blade, how the saw is set up, or how the teeth of the blade have worn from use. If accuracy of your cut is critical, you should make a test cut in identical material to determine whether blade drift will be an issue or not. If blade drift is not an issue, then a rip fence, a more traditional style of fence, should work acceptably to help you control your cut. If it appears that blade drift will be an issue, the recommendation is that you use a point fence. A point fence can help you keep the width of the cut consistent, yet allows you to adjust the angle you feed the material through the blade if necessary as you make the cut. Resawing with a tall fence is covered in the resaw video. If for any reason you think that the bandsaw is not cutting as it should, please notify a staff member who will investigate the situation. If you think that something other than the upper blade guard of the bandsaw needs to be adjusted, contact a staff person. If you think that the bandsaw sounds or feels odd as you're making a cut, contact a staff person. Significant safety concerns when using a bandsaw include the following. You should maintain control of the material you are cutting at all times. You should not let your fingers get too close to the blade, not closer than 2 inches. You should not force the cut, let the saw do the work. You should back off on the pressure when you get to the end of the cut. Make relief cuts to keep the blade from binding. Let's examine these principles in action as we make a cut on a bandsaw. Do not let your fingers get closer than 2 inches to the blade. Apply even pressure that is enough to keep the material moving through the cutting area, but not so much pressure as to cause the blade to deflect or the motor to strain. Listen to the sound that the saw makes. Do not hurry or rush your cut. On a bandsaw, you can stop pushing without creating an unsafe condition or damaging your material. As you are reaching the end of a through cut, Decrease the pressure and slow down the movement of material. The blade will accelerate through the last part of the cut and burst through. Slowing down helps you maintain control. If you are making a long cut in material, or if you are making a cut that is an inside curve, relief cuts should be made that intersect long cuts. Factors to consider when deciding which bandsaw is the best saw to use for a cut include the following: the size of the material, as in the width of the material or the thickness or height of the material, and the type of cut that you want to make. Is it a curved cut, tight, or gradual, or is it a resaw cut? Let's take a closer look at how these factors impact saw selection. The width of the material that can be cut on a bandsaw is determined by the distance between the blade and the column. This is called the throat depth. Selecting a saw that has adequate throat depth is particularly important when making curved cuts. The vertical cut height of a bandsaw is limited to about ½ inch less than the height that the upper blade guides can be raised above the table of the bandsaw. The width of the blade determines how tight a curve can be cut on the bandsaw. The narrower the blade on the saw you're using, the tighter the curve you'll be able to make. There are multiple 14-inch bandsaws in the shop. One or two will typically be set up with a narrow blade for use in making cuts with tighter curves. The other 14-inch saws are typically set up with a somewhat wider blade for general purpose cutting. Some of the 14-inch bandsaws have the vertical capacity to cut thicker material. Please ask a staff person if you are not sure which bandsaw would be the best to use for a cut you want to make. On the 14-inch bandsaws, the following process is used to adjust the upper blade guide. Support the upper blade guide while loosening the blade guide locking knob on the back of the saw with the other hand. Move the guide up or down until it is in the desired position, about ½ inch above the top of the material to be cut. While holding the guide at the desired height, tighten the knob on the back of the saw. The 14-inch bandsaws are not currently connected to the dust collection system. The 20-inch bandsaw, the large gray Delta, is used to cut larger material and is set up with a wider blade than the 14-inch bandsaws. Because the blade is wider, curves cut on this saw cannot be tighter than a 5-inch radius. The 20-inch bandsaw has a blade brake foot pedal which should be used to stop the blade more quickly after the saw is turned off. Failure to use the blade brake allows the blade to continue moving for an extended time after the saw is turned off, which is an unsafe situation. Adjusting the upper blade guide height on the 20-inch saw is very similar to the process used for a 14-inch saw. To adjust the upper blade guide, support the guide and loosen the blade guide locking knob, move the guide into the desired position, and tighten the knob. Be sure that dust collection is used when using the saw. The 24-inch bandsaw, the large gold Powermatic, is used to make resaw cuts or to make cuts in material too large to cut on the 20-inch Delta. Because the blade is so wide, only straight cuts can be made on this saw. This saw also has a blade brake foot pedal which should be used to stop the blade more quickly after the saw is turned off. On this saw, the following process is used to adjust the upper blade guide. Loosen the blade guide locking knob on the back of the saw. Use the hand crank nearest the knob to move the guide up or down until it is in the desired position, about ½ inch above the top of the material to be cut. Tighten the blade guide locking knob. Be sure that dust collection is used when this saw is used. Resawing is a process where a thicker board is cut into a thinner one, or where slices of thin material, like veneer, are cut from a board. There is a separate video that covers the resawing process in more detail, since that process requires different setup and material handling than you would typically use. If you are making an interrupted cut, a long cut, or a cut on an inside curve, relief cuts are recommended. Relief cuts are cuts that help to safely separate the scrap material from the desired cut and reduce the risk of blade binding. Relief cuts are interrupted cuts made at right angles to the main cut. On a bandsaw, relief cuts are made from the outside edge of the material. Whichever bandsaw you use, you should leave your work area clean. Vacuum up after equipment use. That means the table, around and under the table, and inside the doors. Thank you for watching the video, and we hope you come to visit us in the shop sometime soon.